The wind howled through the canyon like a beast with 1,000 throats, gnawing at the timbers of Joel McAllister's barn. Sleet battered the shingles, and the rafters groaned with every gust. It was the kind of night that kept coyotes curled tight in their dens and ranchers wide awake, staring into the dark with old memories clawing at their ribs. Joel had seen worse storms. He'd survived them with nothing but whiskey and the silence of a home too big for one man. But tonight, something was different. A cry pierced the wind, not the whimper of an animal, but the thin, panicked wail of a child. He froze mid-step, the firewood cradled in his arms slipping to the floor with a hollow thud. The sound came again, distant but real, carried by the storm's breath. Setting the latch on his rifle, Joel yanked on his oilskin coat, shoved open the door, and stepped into the teeth of the night. His boots crunched over frozen mud and straw as he crossed the yard toward the barn. Each step felt heavier than the last. The light from his lantern bobbed against the darkness, casting long, twitching shadows across the fence posts and empty troughs. When he flung open the barn doors, the hinges shrieked like something dying. And there she was. Curled against a bale of hay, barely more than a shadow herself, lay a woman wrapped in a threadbare cloak. Her face was pale, blood smeared across her temple, and her breathing shallow. Nestled in her arms, 2 infants slept, their tiny fists clenched, their breath steaming in the cold. Joel didn't move for a full 10 seconds. The storm swelled behind him, but inside, the world narrowed to that single image, mother and children, alone, broken, and buried in silence. The rifle slipped from his hands and thudded against the hay. She stirred slightly at the noise. One eye blinked open, unfocused and glassy. Panic rushed in as instinct took hold. She clutched the babies tighter, flinched away from him like a cornered animal. "Don't," Joel said gruffly, raising his palms. "I ain't here to hurt you." She didn't answer. She could barely stay upright. He stepped closer, slowly, like approaching a wounded mare. The floor creaked under his weight. She didn't flinch again, she just sagged against the hay, lips blue, arms trembling. "I'm gonna lift you," he said. "You'll freeze out here." Still nothing. Joel knelt, tested her weight. She was light, too light, and the babies, swaddled in mismatched blankets, let out muffled cries as he lifted the whole fragile bundle into his arms. The wind whipped at them as he hurried back across the yard, shielding the children with his coat. The cabin was a rough-hewn thing, half-choked by dust, haunted by echoes of laughter long since gone. Joel kicked open the door, cleared space on the couch, and gently laid her down. She moaned faintly, clutching one child tighter in her sleep. Joel worked quickly, stoking the fire, boiling water, gathering blankets. His hands moved with purpose, but his mind reeled. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why was she bleeding? Once the room warmed and the children were wrapped beside her, he finally let himself sit. His body ached. His heart, long dormant, thudded unevenly in his chest. He stared at her face, the curve of her jaw, the bruises blooming across her skin, and wondered what kind of hell she had crawled from. He didn't sleep. By morning, the storm had gentled, leaving a gray hush over the valley. Snow clung to the windows in patches, melting slowly. Joel sat at the table, staring into a tin cup of coffee gone cold, when he heard her stir. The woman groaned, then sat up too fast. Pain crackled through her, and she clutched her side with a sharp gasp. "Easy," Joel said, not looking up. She blinked hard, taking in the unfamiliar cabin, the wood walls, the heavy boots drying by the fire. Then her eyes found her babies, safe and asleep in the blanket-lined basket near the hearth. Relief cracked her features like sunlight through frost. "You carried us here," she said hoarsely. Joel nodded once. "Found you in my barn. You were damn near frozen." She looked away, lips pressing thin. "I didn't mean to trespass. I just needed a place for one night." "Place is yours for now," Joel said, standing. "You need rest. And food. I won't be trouble." "You're already trouble," he muttered. Her head snapped up, but he didn't meet her glare. He ladled stew into a tin bowl and set it beside her. "Eat." She hesitated, then picked up the spoon with shaking fingers. He watched her hands, calloused, scarred, but deft. She had the look of someone who'd worked hard and been worked harder. "Name?" he asked after a long silence. She paused mid-bite, lowering the spoon. "Ellie." "Joel." She nodded. Said nothing more. The twins stirred, and she rose stiffly, moving to them like her soul resided in their tiny frames. Joel watched her tuck the blankets tighter, coo soft nothings, her voice ragged but tender. It felt like something holy, something he had once known and lost too soon. Later, as the fire dimmed and Ellie drifted into uneasy sleep beside her children, Joel sat by the window, rifle in lap. He hadn't seen anyone on the road in days, but something in the way she looked over her shoulder, always, even in sleep, told him trouble wasn't far behind. That night, he heard her whimper. He lit no lamp, just walked quietly to the edge of the room and listened. Ellie twisted in her sleep, muttering fragments. No. Not again, please, they're mine. Joel's hands tightened on the rifle. In the morning, she tried to leave. I appreciate your help, but I can't stay, she said, strapping the babies to her back with strips of cloth, her movements slow and painful. He'll be looking for us. Who? She shook her head. Doesn't matter. The hell it doesn't, Joel snapped. You got 2 babes, a wound on your head, and no horse. Whoever you're running from, they find you out there, they'll do more than finish the job. I've handled worse. He stepped between her and the door. You barely handled sleepin' in a barn. She wavered, the cold creeping in again. One baby coughed, a dry, pitiful sound. Her lips trembled. Joel didn't wait for her to collapse. He grabbed the closest chair and slid it toward the fire. Sit, he said. You walk out that door, you'll kill those babies. Her eyes met his, steel and sorrow clashing. Then she sat. Days passed in uneasy quiet. Joel made no demands. Ellie offered no explanations. But routines formed. He chopped wood. She mended blankets. He fetched milk from a neighbor. She boiled water and bathed the children. They moved around each other like ghosts, quiet, heavy, too full of stories they weren't ready to tell. Then, one morning, as Joel shoveled snow from the porch, he saw it. Tracks. Hoofprints leading toward the woods, fresh, too fresh for comfort. He followed them to the edge of the pines. The snow was disturbed in strange ways, someone had circled the cabin, staying just out of sight. Watching. Joel returned with a tight jaw and a sharper eye. That night, as Ellie sang a lullaby soft enough to break a man's heart, Joel sat at the window, rifle across his lap, eyes trained on the trees. He said nothing to her. Not yet. But in the dying light, he whispered a name he hadn't spoken in 5 years. Sarah. The name hung there, unanswered. And in the barn, beneath a sky torn with clouds, something moved. The wind had lost its bite, but the cold lingered like a shadow in the bones. Snow still clung to the low hills, though spring's thaw had begun to reveal patches of brown earth and timid green. In the days since he'd found her in his barn, Joel had kept a watchful eye on the tree line, a silent sentinel. He fixed the fence, checked the horses, did the things a man does to keep his hands busy when his mind is churning with thoughts he doesn't care to name. Ellie was healing, slowly. The bruises on her face were beginning to fade, and the fever that threatened her on the second night had broken with sweat and whispered prayers. She moved easier now, but not without effort. Her ribs were cracked, Joel was sure, and one shoulder sat wrong, favoring the other when she lifted the babies. Still, she never complained. That morning, Joel found her outside, tending to a fire with the twins in a bundle on her back. Her fingers were red from the cold, her breath curling into the morning light. You ought to rest, Joel said, stepping out with an armload of kindling. I've done enough resting, she replied. Feels like I've been running forever. Can't sit still too long. Joel didn't argue. He set the kindling down and crouched by the fire. She avoided his eyes, as she usually did, focusing instead on feeding a small piece of jerky to one of the twins. I was promised to a man, she said finally, her voice thin, like ice cracking over a stream. Not by choice. My daddy owed him. He thought marrying me off would settle things. Joel waited. Clayton Ridge, she continued, bitter. Big man in Helena. Railroad money. Calls himself a gentleman in the daylight. Turns into something else behind closed doors. Joel's jaw tightened. You ran from him. I tried to. When I told him I was pregnant, he laughed. Said the kids would be raised by his sisters, called by his name, and I'd be a shadow in the nursery, if I was lucky. You tell anyone? Who'd believe me? Her hands trembled as she pulled the babies closer. He's got judges in his pocket. Sheriffs too. One word from him and I'd vanish. So I vanished first. Joel stared into the fire, his silence not cold but heavy, full of things he could say but didn't. Truth is, she whispered, I didn't think we'd make it. I had a knife. Told myself if it came to it, I'd do it quick. Joel stood abruptly. You ever talk like that again in front of them, I'll throw you off this land myself. Ellie looked up, startled. They need you. Those kids don't have a damn thing in this world but you. And maybe me, if I choose to be fool enough. She blinked, something between shame and gratitude flickering in her eyes. Later that day, Joel drove the wagon into town to trade for supplies. He didn't like leaving her alone, but the flour was gone, and the goats hadn't dropped enough milk to get the twins through the next few nights. He rode in fast, didn't stop to talk. But whispers waited in every corner. The man at the mercantile eyed him strangely. A stranger on a black horse had passed through just days ago, asking about a dark-haired girl with twins, flashing gold coins and a silver ring. Joel took the flour, sugar, and bullets, then left without a word. At the post outside the saloon, he saw it, tacked beneath a faded announcement about a traveling medicine show. A bounty notice. Wanted, Eleanor Gray. Suspected theft, fraud, kidnapping of minors. Last seen near Bitter Creek. Reward $100 for safe return ***. Joel stared at it for a long moment, until the bartender came out and quietly tore it down. I didn't put it up, the man muttered. Some fancy writer left it here. Didn't sit long at his table. Asked too many questions. Joel turned his horse back to the trail. He reached the ranch by dusk. The sky was streaked with orange and indigo, and smoke curled from the chimney. Safe. For now. Inside, Ellie rocked the twins, humming a tune under her breath. Joel entered without a word, setting down the sack of flour and 2 sacks of bullets. They know you're here, he said. Her hand stilled. He's using the law. Called you a thief. Kidnapper. Her mouth opened, then closed again. I've stolen nothing, she said finally. Not even my own life. Joel nodded. I believe you. But believing won't stop him. That night, Joel didn't sleep. He paced the porch with his rifle, boots echoing against the boards. His eyes searched the trees, every shadow a threat, every silence a warning. His world had been empty for so long, the sudden purpose shook him. He'd buried love once. Buried it deep, beside his wife and the son who hadn't lived long enough to speak. But Ellie's twins had eyes like his boys. Wide. Unknowing. Needing. A low whistle broke the stillness. Joel turned toward the ridge behind the barn, rifle raised. A shape stepped out of the dark, tall, lean, and silent. A man wrapped in deerskin, hair braided down his back, face painted in faded war colors. Joel didn't lower the gun. You're trespassing, he called. The man said nothing. Name? Still nothing. Then, softly, Waya. Joel recognized it. Cherokee. Wolf. Danger walks behind you, Waya said. Then he turned, stepped back into the trees, and vanished. Joel stood there for a long time. The next day, he told Ellie they needed to prepare. They built barriers around the barn, rigged the doors with crude alarms. Joel took her into the woods and showed her how to hold a rifle. Her hands shook, but her aim was true. If I miss, she asked. Then shoot again. He noticed the way she moved more freely now, her strength returning. She stood taller, even when the cold wind returned. She didn't flinch at shadows anymore. At night, the cabin was quiet. The twins slept soundly. Joel carved a small wooden horse by the fire. Ellie mended the baby's blanket. Neither spoke much, but their silences had changed, warmer now, almost companionable. Then, just before sunrise on the 5th day, a carriage appeared. Joel saw it first through the spyglass. Black wheels. Silver trim. A horseman ahead, another behind. At the center, Clayton Ridge. Joel had never seen the man before, but he knew. Clayton stepped out slowly, brushing dust from his coat. He looked up at the cabin with the calm assurance of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. Joel stepped out onto the porch, rifle across his shoulder. Clayton smiled like a knife. I believe you have something of mine, he said. Joel didn't answer. I don't want trouble. I want what's mine. My fiancé. My children. They don't seem to want you. That's not their choice. Ellie stepped into view behind Joel. Her face pale, lips tight. Clayton's eyes lit up. There she is. Look at you, girl. Still running? Haven't you tired of pretending to be more than you are? She said nothing. Clayton took a step forward. Come now. Bring the little ones. Let's end this nonsense. Joel's rifle clicked softly as he shifted it into his hands. You walk back to your coach, he said. You don't look back. You don't return. Clayton's eyes narrowed. You'd kill a man over some battered stray? Joel didn't blink. Over the truth. Clayton sneered. This isn't over, McAllister. I'll be back with law. And I'll burn this place to the ground if I have to. Joel didn't speak again. He held the rifle steady as the carriage turned, the wheels groaning over frostbitten soil. The men with Clayton glared, but followed. Once they were gone, Ellie stood shaking in the doorway. I thought he'd take them. I thought. He didn't, Joel said. She sank to the floor beside the hearth, tears carving tracks down her cheeks. Joel didn't touch her. He just sat beside her in silence. Outside, on the ridge where the trees began, a shadow watched them. And waited. The moon rose blood-red over the pines that night, swollen and low like it had been dragged too close to the earth. It cast a strange light over Joel's land, painting the snow in rust and fire, as if the world already knew violence was coming. The cattle were restless in the lower pasture. The horses snorted and paced behind the barn. Even the twins, usually asleep by dusk, whined with uneasy cries that Ellie couldn't soothe. Joel felt it in his bones, an ache, a pressure. Storms of men didn't come with thunder. They came with silence. Inside the cabin, Ellie checked the latch on the window for the third time. Her hands were trembling again. She hated it. Hated that even after standing tall against Clayton, she could still feel the echo of his presence like fingerprints on her skin. Joel was at the table, laying out ammunition with quiet precision. Bullets gleamed under the lamplight. His face was unreadable, but his shoulders were tight, his jaw locked. He didn't need to speak. The whole house was waiting. "Do you think he'll come tonight?" Ellie asked, barely above a whisper. Joel didn't look up. "I'd bet my life on it." Ellie pulled the twins closer into the makeshift crib. One of them stirred in his sleep and reached for her fingers. She pressed her lips to his forehead and stood. "I want to help," she said. "You already are. I mean with a rifle." He finally looked at her. "You ready to shoot a man?" She held his gaze. "If he comes for my children, I won't flinch." He nodded once and reached under the bench for a second rifle. It was lighter, the one he'd taught her with in the woods. She took it, hand steady now. The fear was still there, rooted deep, but it no longer ruled her. It was something she'd learned to carry. They set up their positions. Joel moved to the barn, where the east side offered the best view of the trail. He stationed himself in the loft behind stacked hay bales, rifle braced on a beam. From there, he could see the tree line, the split rail fence, and the long path leading toward town. Ellie stayed inside, crouched behind the thick support beam by the hearth. She laid out extra rounds beside her, kept the babies in the back room with the door cracked just wide enough to hear them breathe. A pot of water boiled on the fire, not for tea, but for burning wounds if it came to that. The first shot didn't come from Joel. It came from the woods, sharp and clean, a warning shot that slammed into the post outside the cabin. Joel didn't flinch. He was already aiming. Shadows moved between the trees. 6 men, maybe 7. All on horseback, all armed. They wore dark coats and bandanas, faces covered. One of them held a torch. Joel exhaled, slow and steady. His finger curled around the trigger. Then he spotted the man in the center, tall, smug, with a silver-handled revolver strapped to his thigh. Clayton Ridge. He didn't wear his hat tonight. The wind carried his voice too well. "You've made a mistake, McAllister," he shouted. "You're harboring a fugitive and kidnapping my blood. This is your last chance to walk away." Joel didn't answer. He aimed slightly left and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked the night open like lightning. One of the horsemen fell sideways with a grunt, crashing into the snow. Chaos erupted. Horses screamed. Guns fired wildly. The torch dropped, sputtering out in the frost. Clayton ducked behind his horse, roaring orders. 2 men charged forward, making for the porch. Joel took another shot, catching one in the thigh. The man screamed and went down, crawling into the brush. The second man reached the porch and kicked in the door. He wasn't expecting Ellie. She rose from behind the beam and fired point-blank. The rifle's report was deafening in the tight space. The man flew backward, struck in the shoulder, crashing through the table and writhing on the floor. Ellie grabbed the second rifle and moved to the window, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Outside, Joel dropped from the loft to the barn floor. He kicked open the rear doors and sprinted into the snow, using the shadows to flank Clayton's position. Bullets tore through the trees behind him, but none found purchase. He reached the fence line and dove behind a log just as 2 of Clayton's men rounded the corner. Joel fired twice. One hit the tree beside a man's head. The second dropped another rider clean off his mount. The horse reared and galloped into the woods. Back in the cabin, the second twin started to cry, shrill and loud. Ellie turned, torn between instinct and defense. She backed into the hallway, laid the rifle down beside the crib, and scooped the baby into her arms. He was red-faced and shaking. A creak came from the back porch. She froze. The back door had been locked. She was sure of it. But now, slowly, it was opening. She placed the baby gently back beside his brother, grabbed the knife from under the crib, and stood with her back against the wall. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Then a voice, low and mocking. "Come now, Ellie. You didn't think this would end any other way?" Clayton. She stepped into the hallway, the knife held low. "You don't belong here." He stepped into the light, coat dusted with snow, revolver in hand. He looked at her the way a butcher looks at meat. "You've humiliated me," he said. "Made me hunt you like an animal. I'm not yours." He tilted his head. "You were. And so are they." She didn't hesitate. She lunged. The knife slashed across his forearm before he could react. He cried out and fired, but the bullet slammed into the wall. Ellie ducked, drove her shoulder into his chest, sending him staggering. She grabbed the rifle from the floor and aimed it at his heart. But her hands were shaking. Too much. Her vision blurred. Clayton recovered fast, knocked the barrel aside, and punched her hard across the face. She crumpled to the floor, groaning. He raised the revolver. The shot never came. Joel burst through the door, a shotgun in his hands, and fired. Clayton flew backward, slammed into the wall, and dropped the revolver. He rolled over, gasping, his coat stained dark. Joel stepped forward, gun raised again, but Clayton laughed through the blood in his teeth. "You think it ends here?" he rasped. "You kill me, and they'll come anyway. The law, it don't care who's right. Only who's rich." Joel aimed the barrel at his head. His finger trembled. "Do it," Clayton snarled. "Prove you're as much a savage as I said." Joel didn't move. Then a shadow appeared in the doorway. Wyatt. Silent. Barefoot. Bow in hand. Clayton's eyes widened. "You." The arrow struck clean and fast. Straight through the throat. Clayton jerked once, then collapsed in a heap, gurgling. Ellie lay on the floor, bleeding from her temple. Joel dropped beside her, pulling her into his arms. She groaned but blinked up at him, dazed. "Twins," she whispered. "They're safe," he said. "You are too." Outside, the remaining riders had fled. Wyatt stepped past the bodies without a word and vanished into the trees, just as the first snowflakes began to fall again, soft and silent. Joel sat there on the floor, holding Ellie, the warmth of the fire dancing across her face, mixing with the blood and tears. He didn't say anything for a long time. There was nothing to say yet. Only breath. And survival. And the knowledge that when the blood moon dipped below the horizon, the world would not be the same. Morning came slow, as if the sun itself was reluctant to rise over the bloodshed. Smoke drifted lazily from the cabin chimney, curling into the pale gray sky. The world was still, eerily still. Even the birds kept silent. Joel stood at the edge of the porch, his coat hanging off one shoulder, one arm wrapped in a crude sling, and watched the thaw creeping down from the hills. Patches of green had begun to poke through the snow. It was the kind of morning that should have meant new life. Inside, Ellie moved with quiet purpose. Her steps were slow, her bruises deep, but her eyes no longer darted like a hunted thing. She carried the twins across the room, pausing at the window. They cooed softly in her arms, pressing tiny hands against the glass. Their mother's face reflected back at them, marked, tired, but unbroken. She had not slept much since that night. Neither had Joel. But it wasn't fear that kept them awake anymore. It was the weight of what they'd done. What they'd survived. Joel came in without knocking. His boots were muddy, eyes shadowed. He nodded toward the fire, and Ellie handed him the smaller twin, already reaching for his beard with curious fingers. Joel accepted the child like he was made of smoke, then settled into the rocking chair. "You keep looking at me like I'm gonna disappear," he muttered. "I'm not used to men staying after the fight. I don't much stay anywhere." She sat across from him. The silence between them was no longer heavy, it was comfortable. Familiar. Still, something shifted in her face as she glanced at the door, then at the saddlebag she'd packed 2 days earlier. "You don't think it's over, do you?" she asked. "It's never over," Joel said. "Just quieter for a while. I could go. Take the boys somewhere far. Start again." He didn't answer right away. Just stared into the fire, the baby curled against his chest. "I keep thinking about my boy," he said. "He'd have been 6 by now. Buried him out by the cottonwoods next to his mama. Used to think there wasn't anything in this world left worth staying for. Then I found you shivering in my barn, and for the first time in 5 damn years, I didn't want to be alone." Ellie looked down at her hands, rubbed the ring finger where Clayton's band had once dug into her skin. The scars were fading, but the memories hadn't. They probably never would. "You're a good man, Joel," she said softly. He shook his head. "I'm just a man. But I know the difference between right and wrong, and I know when someone needs protectin'. You and those boys, you didn't ask for me, but you got me anyway." Before she could respond, the sound of hooves echoed in the valley. Slow, deliberate. Joel tensed, shifted the child to Ellie's arms, and reached for the rifle leaning against the door. A lone rider came into view, wearing a long brown coat and a wide-brimmed hat. No weapons drawn. He dismounted slowly, raising both hands. "Marshal Greeley," he called out. "Got word from Helena. I ain't here to cause trouble." Joel didn't lower the rifle. "You alone?" "Rode out from town this morning. Got papers. Thought you'd want to see 'em." Ellie stepped onto the porch beside Joel, the twins cradled in her arms. The marshal looked at her, then back at Joel, then slowly reached into his satchel and pulled out a folded letter. Joel kept the rifle raised as Ellie opened the parchment with one hand. Her eyes skimmed the words, and her breath caught. "It's a withdrawal notice," she whispered. "Clayton's assets have been frozen. His claims dismissed. He's been declared unfit as guardian." Joel finally lowered the gun. "You come all this way for that?" The marshal nodded. "Wasn't right, what he did. Word spread after, what happened here. Weren't hard for the truth to find light. Man like him always leaves enemies. One of 'em sent proof to the circuit judge. Joel exhaled. A long, quiet breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The marshal tipped his hat and turned to leave. You're good folks. I'll make sure no one else comes pokin' around. You've earned your peace. And just like that, he rode off, swallowed by the trees. That night, the sky opened. Rain, real rain, poured from the heavens, washing the earth clean of its long winter. Ellie stepped outside and turned her face to the sky, eyes closed, letting it run down her cheeks. Joel stood at the door, arms crossed, watching her with something close to reverence. The twins cried out from their crib, startled by the thunder. Ellie rushed in and scooped them up, murmuring comfort. Joel followed, closing the door behind him. By the hearth, she rocked them, and Joel sat down beside her on the floor, shoulder to shoulder. She leaned her head against him. You think we can stay? She asked quietly. I think we've already started to. They sat like that for a long time. No promises. No need for them. Joel rose first and walked to the mantel. From around his neck, he pulled a thin leather cord. At the end of it hung a wedding ring, dull and worn. He kissed it once, then walked outside into the rain. Ellie watched from the window as he knelt by the cottonwoods and dug a small hole. There, he placed the ring in the earth, covering it slowly with dark soil. When he stood again, his face was wet, but not just from the rain. He came back in, soaked to the bone, and stood before her. You don't have to go, he said. Ellie smiled, and it was the first time it wasn't bittersweet. You sure? She asked. He nodded. I want you to stay. Not for them. For you. She walked toward him, took his hand. Then we stay. By spring, the barn had been rebuilt. The pastures had turned green again. Neighbors stopped by more often, drawn by the smoke from the chimney and the sounds of children laughing. Joel still rose before dawn and rode the fence line, but now there were tiny boots by the door and 2 cribs by the fire. Some evenings, Ellie would sing. Not the broken lullabies she used to hum in fear, but real songs, soft, warm, full of new beginnings. Joel never joined in, but he listened, always, from his chair by the fire. And sometimes, when the sun dipped behind the hills and the light grew gold, he'd feel the ache in his chest lessen just a little. In the closing moments, a voice speaks, Joel's, quiet and steady. Sometimes, a storm don't come to destroy you. It comes to clean the dust, water the roots, and show you what was still alive underneath. If this story stirred something in you, give it a like, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more stories where healing rides in quiet, like rain after fire. The screen fades to black. Then the first drops of rain begin again.